Hikers and backpackers of Reddit. What is the weirdest or creepiest thing you have found while hiking? I was backpacking in Yellowstone above the tree line at about 10,500 feet. We are hiking on a ridge above a lake when all of a sudden we come across a horse skull. No body, just the skull. Pretty cool looking. We get to our campsite not too far away from the lake near where we found the horse skull. When we climb down to the lake, we find the body of the horse rotting on the edge of the lake with negative film strips floating in the water and laying around the shore near the body. I was backpacking in New Hampshire and camped out for the night after a day hike. I wandered off from our fire to go take a piss and stumbled upon a circle etched into the ground with tuning forks surrounding the circle standing up straight. It looked like a creepy ritual circle and it bugged me out, so I booked it back to the group. Edit. This kinda blew up, but it was in White Mountain Nation Forest. It was a campsite called 13 Falls, pretty cool area and a really easy hike. It was an overall good trip. And I'm sorry I didn't take touch pedophile the tuning forks. I wasn't trying to fuck with the ritual dudes. My GF and I were hiking not through hiking, just seeing how much we had time to do on and off for 3 months, and we're alone and haven't seen anyone for a while. I'm ahead when I come across this very large brass eagle on our stump. Middle of nowhere, was heavy. Going along and there is more and more random detritus, left behind one object at a time. We get to the shelter that night and there is this old guy, very disheveled with a walking staff that has a baby doll head on the top. Immediate creepy vibes. It was just us and him at the shelter that night. We stayed on the top level and he was down below. I don't think I slept at all. It got real creepy when he started telling stories that night of how he used to drive a cab in New Orleans, and he told about how he didn't mind if people had sex in the back of his cab, as he could watch in the rearview mirror. Got up early the next day and got the fuck out. Left him some power bars as he looked like he needed them. He probably had schizophrenia. Hiking to one of my favorite spots in the Appalachian MTNS, I came across what appeared to be a recently built stone altar with a large wooden cross situated behind it. There was a string tied to the cross that went directly over the altar and tied to a tree across the way. Several other strings tied to trees, all of which had markings freshly carved into them. There was a pentagram of rocks in the middle of all of it. There's been lots of rumors throughout the years of satanic cults worshipping in the woods of this area. This was my first experience with it. Geocaching hike deep in the New Mexico wilderness. Entered a clearing and saw a series of half-built crumbling concrete structures. Rebar poking out of the concrete, and a dirt road approaching from the opposite direction of my hike. Footprints and some recent trash indicated people were still using the site. The whole thing seemed somehow post-apocalyptic and eerie. I was hiking alone, and for some reason the whole situation was freaking me out a bit. I decided to abort the hike and back out the way I hiked in. Found out later the site was used as a paintball tournament ground and designed on an urban warfare theme. There was absolutely no evidence of spent balls or paint on the concrete walls, which explains my confusion and the eeriness of finding half-destroyed buildings in the middle of nowhere. I went for a hike climb with a friend in the Moorlands and Hills, northwest England. Got to the very top of the tallest tor in the area and found a completely abandoned tent ripped to shreds. Belongings, clothes and electrical stuff, CD player, GPS etc. was strewn about randomly and haphazardly with footsteps everywhere. We just concluded someone had had a change of heart in the middle of the night, but then why leave so all the expensive electrical toys? Found a bunch of items scattered around that looked like they belonged in a purse. I would say they were there 2 maybe 3 weeks. Opened the wallet and found just the driver's license. A classmate who was with us took the ID to sell it to a minor as a fake ID. Kinda fucked up. Nobody really did or said anything about the whole scenario, but it definitely creeped us out. Bushwalking in NSW, Australia, me and my friend came across this weird platform looking thing made out of rocks. Later that year the cops arrested some bloke on suspicion of the murders of a series of backpackers who had gone missing over the course of a few years, and at the sites of several of the murders slightly off in the bush were these altars. Current affairs show runs footage of one. The trial and run up to it were all over the news, and yeah, it's that thing we found. The altars were typically no more than 300 yards from the victim's shallow graves. The guy who was arrested and subsequently convicted for the murders is Ivan Millett, Australia's worst serial killer. NB the cops are pretty sure that at least one other person was involved in the murders than the one now in jail for the crime. They just couldn't prove it. I've spent various stretches of time backpacking and camping throughout the US and seen some strange things. My brother and I came across an abandoned trailer town, of sorts, that scared the hell out of us. We also came across a rundown town, really small, out in New Mexico that seemed to have one person living in it. We based that on the fact that there was still some food and supplies there that were fairly fresh, perhaps just a few days old. Spent a couple days there trying to find the person, just to find out why they were staying in the town. Never found a person. We found the skeletal remains of an unknown number of deer, ranging from bucks to fawn, ensnared in a barbed wire fence that encompassed a 10x10 area in the Ozarks. A few of the skulls topped the fence posts, and there was one post in the middle of this area that had decaying deer bodies, looked to be 2, but there were only 6 hooves jutting out of the wreckage, wrapped around it. We found a dummy hanging from a tree while in the Yukon Territory of Canada. Literally out in the middle of the woods. No reason for it, as far as we know. And we also came across a dead junkie on a road out of Olympia. Obvious OD, as he had his arm tied and a needle in hand. Eyes were glazed over and staring straight ahead, mouth slightly ajar. Edit. Why do you guys want it to be meese? It's technically moose. Plural and singular. So this might be pretty amateur compared to the others, but here I go. A couple years ago I lived with a few roommates at the bottom of a bluff in the Minnesota-Wisconsin area. We used to hike this bluff all the time. There were no trails, but we just made our own trails. Lots of fun. Anyways, coming back from one of the hikes we were getting close to our house. We were about 100 yards back from our neighbor's house, still in the woods bluff though. We came across a small fire pit, picnic table, and then next to the fire there was a deer corpse. Nothing but flesh and bone. It wasn't super scary or anything, but it was the fact that it was that close to civilization just laying by a fire pit. Got really weird vibes from it. Edit. Oh, thought of another one. This one is more scary, to me. On another hike up the same bluff, halfway up the bluff we came up to a dark and creepy cave. Just tall enough to kneel or crawl though. Right outside of this cave there was a fire pit that had recently been used and a dead possum next to it. I tried braving up to go inside the cave, but it was dark and really creepy. It also had a terrible smell coming from it. The whole setup of the cave and campfire was really creepy. I don't know why, but I never took pictures of these instances. During some time off in a small town in northern British Columbia, I hiked up an old mountain biking trail in order to find some geocaches. The trail had loads of old collapsed wooden structures and small bridges, pretty cool stuff. After finding the caches, I continued up the side of the hill, off trail, and ended up at the top, at the edge of a large marshy swampy area. Someone had built a big wooden platform, kind of like a very large shipping pallet, at the edge of the marsh. And placed carefully and neatly under it were 2 pairs of shoes. They were in good shape, and I had a perfect view over the marsh. There was no one in sight at all. Strange stuff, especially cause there weren't even any socks in them. My family went backpacking in Yosemite and one night they woke up to a bunch of noises. When they opened their tents, they saw a mother and 2 cubs stealing all of their bear cans. They had to chase the bears away and get their food back because they were still a couple days from the main valley, so they started to chuck rocks and things at them. Finally my dad threw a large log at the mother snarled, dropped the cans, and ran away. My dad looks back at it and he's kinda scared that he did that because it could have turned out a lot worse due to the fact that it was a mother bear and her cubs. TL. Dr. Dad threw a log at a mother bear and her cubs to save their backpacking food. My parents had recently moved from the city out to a small acreage south of Calgary, Alberta. Their place is nestled in between 2 rivers a mile or 2 from where the rivers meet, so there is a lot of crown land to explore. I was exploring the riverbanks with a girl I liked at the time. We had been walking for a few hours before we found a nice clearing in the trees. One of the trees had a number of planks nailed into it for climbing. Naturally curious, I immediately hopped up the makeshift ladder without thinking twice. I had climbed a few rungs by the time I looked up, and not a foot above my face hung a severed deer head. I jumped right down and my friend and I got the hell out of there, suspecting whatever rednecks did that might be coming back. TLDR, I think that's right. I climbed a tree not realizing there was a severed deer head hanging in it. I was once canoeing the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada. These aren't your normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes interconnected with each other, think many Great Lakes. We had been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week at this point. We didn't really have an itinerary, just planned to boat and camp, fish, and live off the land 2 weeks. We had a GPS and a sat phone to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we were done. Anyway, about a week in and we were set to canoe a few hours to the next lake. An hour or so in and we're in the center of an extremely long and narrow lake. Unfortunately, a storm started to blow in and the waves on the lake swelled to 2+ feet. Too much for our dinky canoes. We pull off to a random clearing on the shore and set up camp in rush to avoid being totally thrashed by a rainstorm. We just set up camp and hunker down for the night. By the next morning it had cleared up. We started walking up the coast of the lake about 200 feet from our camp looking for a good fishing spot. What we actually found was another campsite. However, it was absolutely wrecked. Trash strewn everywhere, tent collapsed and torn, clothes on the ground. At first we were just disgusted what assholes did this? Or left their shit out to be bear food? The more we looked around though, the weirder things seemed though. For one, their garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep it safe from bears, but the whole bag was ripped open despite being 30 feet in the air. Second, literally everything except the canoes was still at the campsite. Clothes, packs, food, rope, pants, like a serious set of hiking equipment. Enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open, mostly the packs, tent, and clothes. The other half was totally untouched but thrown on the ground. Like somebody noped the hell out of there in nothing but their long johns, ditching hundreds of dollars of gear in the process. We waited a couple hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they hadn't been aware of anybody else or gotten any distress calls. We eventually just left everything and moved camp. Everybody was pretty upset by it and a day or 2 later we ended the whole trip early because it seemed like nobody wanted to be out anymore. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. First thought was bear attack, but there was food left uneaten, and I've seen bear attacks on camps before, but nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go after food, and are generally pretty easy to scare away. What still sticks with me is why all their clothes and packs were still there with half being totally destroyed and half being untouched. I still don't get it. I've done a lot of other camping and hiking, rafting and biking, all around the country and I've never had any other weird experiences like that.